Japanese monsters and myths and demons reimagined for modern times. And all the stories are told by different chefs as they sort of try to out-dare each other while they're playing this game called Kaidan. Got some amazing artists on that as well. Vanessa Del Rey, Leo Lanco, Francesco Francavilla, Irene Coe, a really, really great blend of artists. Also doing a comic series on Mata Hari. How many people know who Mata Hari is? Or was? Okay, that's good. And I asked this at another convention, like 3 people raised their hand. So, but anyway, but Mata Hari, you know, is a notorious, legendary, exotic dancer from early 1900s, European who was accused of being a double agent for the Germans and the French, and she was executed by a French firing squad based on really flimsy evidence of working for the Germans. And there was a movie with Greta Garbo, I believe, a silent movie she started. But there's this whole sort of legend and mystique about her, but all the stories that have been done about her, fictional stories about her, have really portrayed her as in a very sexualized way, and the approach that we're taking with a comic is more, was she a victim of her times? Was she treated a certain way because she was a woman, because a loose woman, and so it's a whole different take on this very sort of intriguing, mysterious character, and it's told through sort of fictionalized diary excerpts of her throughout her life. So it's, written by a great new writer, Scottish writer Emma Beebe, talking about new writers and artists, and drawn by a woman, Ariella Cristantina, who's from Indonesia, and then so that's out now. And those 2 are miniseries. I'm also working on a series with Anna Senti and David Aha called The Seeds, and that's coming out this summer. Anne, as many of you probably know, how many of you have read Anne's Daredevil and other Marvel work? And Anne's a great writer, and she and I, we only recently have become friendly, considering that we have both been in comics about the same amount of time.
Not a bad editor herself either.
Yeah, Anne was a really good. Anne was sort of like the Marvel girl editor, and I was sort of like the DC girl editor in the 80s. And we never, we knew each other, we kind of said hi, but we just had our own. I had my little DC world, and she had our Marvel world. But we recently connected in the past couple of years, and we've actually become good friends when she and David Aha pitched me The Seeds. And David is a fantastic artist. Primarily, I think he's only done work for Marvel, I think, right? David Aha?
Yeah,
I think.
maybe Image, I don't know.
Image, no,
yeah.
He hasn't done anything for Image, no, he did this run called, on Hawkeye.
Yeah, the Hawkeye
with,
stuff.
Matt Fraction, and he's a brilliant artist, and he doesn't do that much in comics. He does a lot of stuff outside of comics. But anyway, so they pitched me to create our own thing, and neither of them have done anything create our own, so that's really cool. And The Seeds is their comic series, and that's about an alien who comes to Earth with a few of his alien friends, looking for basically the dying seeds of a race, because they know that with what's going on in terms of environmental destruction and ecological issues, that humankind is numbered, and so they're basically coming to take seeds back with them, human seeds, animal seeds, plant seeds, and so they come to this world, which is really kind of 5 minutes into the future. It's very much like our world, but there's different zones where people live. There's sort of an anti-tech zone, where part of our story takes place. And our alien falls in love with this young woman, and then there's a journalist who is the other sort of third main character in the story, and she's working in a world where she's, again, the last fact-based reporter left, and she's, can't get her stories printed because all her editor wants is something really extreme, because that's what sells stories and that's what gets people interested. Again, very much a reflection on our times. And she sees, so our reporter sees this alien and this woman making out in a bar one night, and she's like, takes their picture, and she's like, uh-oh, so am I gonna basically expose this couple and their story to get the story of my career, or do I kind of keep it to myself? So that's sort of kind of the thing that she wrestles with. So it's a really beautifully told story, and it deals a lot thematically with what's going on in the world. And then the other book that's coming out is out now is Incognito, and that is by Matt Johnson and Warren Pleece. And when I was at Vertigo, they did a graphic novel. Did anyone read Incognito? Graphic novel? Yeah, really wonderful story about a light-skinned African-American newspaper reporter in pre-civil rights New York who went down south to investigate lynchings and would go incognito, and because he was light-skinned, that he could pass for white. And so that story was a thriller, a mystery, and did really well for us at Vertigo. And it went out of print, and the guys got their rights back. And so not only did I republish a new edition at Berger Books, but we also did a prequel called Incognito Renaissance, which takes place in the 1920s, which talks about our lead character as he's a cub reporter first starting out. So it deals with the Harlem Renaissance and the literary and the art scene at the time, and it's really, again, also a murder mystery. So it's some great stuff.
Two quick observations on that when the Surgeon X book was announced at Image Expo, which happened to take place in Seattle, which is where I'm from. So I was down there, and if you've ever been to Image Expo, basically they're trotting out all of their new books and creative teams to generate some enthusiasm for it. And so they were announcing all of these, these sort of cool sounding projects, and then they announced Surgeon X, and people could see Karen was there, and you could hear this sort of murmur go through the crowd. It's like, holy shit, is that Karen Berger? Like, what is she doing here? Like, because it wasn't in the press release, nobody knew that this was happening, and it was a moment, it was a sensational moment.
It was fun. Yeah, I like to surprise people.
And the other thing is that I ran into Anne Vicente the other day, and she was showing me the artwork for this book. People, if you like comic art, check this out. This is, David Aja's stuff is always worth a look, but she was showing me stuff on her phone, and it just looked.
It's really good.
It's really, really gorgeous. Other questions for Karen? Yeah.
What was it like when you were editing Wonder Woman? Did you ever sort of give your perspective as a woman to sort of how that sort of story decision or dialogue decision wouldn't be sort of fitting to some of the characters, because the Wonder Woman title under Perez was very notable for having a lot of female characters, like the Capitello's family and things in that manner. Right. Were there any sort of times where you had to sort of say that's not how Diana would react or the Amazons would react?
Not with George, man. I mean, George was probably more feminist than anybody working on that title. He really was. The whole way that Diana was portrayed, and how the different Amazons were highlighted, and how it was. I don't want to say feminist as much as humanist. I mean, which I think Wonder Woman is all about equality and love and peace and doing the right thing and being ethical. So it's really more of a humanist perspective in many ways than a feminist perspective. But 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 no, George was always totally on the mark. I really didn't have to ever say, George, no, that's what a guy would say. He was just totally, yeah.
So you had a fairly good working environment in that era that was so dominated by male bosses. Were you able to work with everybody without having some of the issues that have come up lately in the news?
Yeah, no, we were talking about that on a panel earlier, and people have asked me over the years, you know, as a woman working in a male-dominated industry, did you ever have any problems? And honestly, I never did. You know, Jeanette Kahn ran the company, and Jeanette, you know, an amazing, creative, innovative person, and she, you know, she really set the tone in a very gentle, soft-spoken way.
Good.
And it was not an issue. And, you know, Ann and I were talking about it as well too, and she said, you know, when she was working at Marvel in the 80s, you know, everyone was nice guys, everyone there was nice, and there were no issues with us. And so yeah,
So
I'm happy to say that.
question related to this guy's thing. I'm just curious that, so a lot of the writers that you worked with and the creators that you worked with at Vertigo, you know, sort of cultivated these personalities as very sort of, you know, rough, irascible characters. Would you like to out anybody as a pussycat who's like, comes on in public as like this real rough person and is really actually kind of a pushover when it comes to working with them? Or?
Yeah, everyone's just really nice. I mean, everyone, like, you know, Neil likes to wear his leather jacket, and you know, but Neil's a you know, a sweetheart, and Grant Morrison is also a very gentle soul. You know, they really are.
But some of them are as they appear.
Like who?
I wouldn't want to be Garth Ennis's editor.
Oh no, Garth is a very sensitive guy, actually.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
And writes great female characters. And actually, Preacher is another book that had a really large female audience too. And again, you wouldn't necessarily expect that because it was very violent, and a lot of, you know, guns and a lot of blood. But you know, women like horror, and also it was a, you know, Preacher was a love story. A big part of Preacher was a love story. So yeah.
So what does the editor do in the context of a monthly series? I mean, where in the process do you edit, and what do you edit?
Well, the editor is involved in bringing it all together. I mean, the editor ultimately acquires the story, and then will work with the writer in development. And every editor works differently, but that's sort of kind of the groundwork, you know, the basic sort of general framework that I'm describing here. But the way that I would work is that I'd work with the writer and the artist on first on the general concept for, say, if it's the first storyline, the character development, and then when we would have the plot together, the writer would write the script, and then we choose an artist together. And the editor really works on editor is really like a producer, but a creative producer, not just the business side of it. So, and the editor then coordinates working with the artist and getting them at each stage of the comic. So, you know, a comics editor, you know, not only has to know story, but has to know art as well. It has to be able to evaluate whether a person not only can draw, but whether they're properly telling the story. And then the editor, again, you know, and hopefully with an assistant editor, helps sort of funnel each stage through between the letterer and the colorist. So it's a combination, you know, of a creative and a sort of massive juggling act. But one other thing I would say is that an editor, in terms of creatively what an editor will do less, because I don't know if I didn't necessarily hit that part, but I think creatively, I think a good editor knows when to edit and when not to edit. And if they really, to me, an editor's job was always to make sure that the writer's vision is coming across in the story. And it's the editor's job to help direct that vision and to say to a writer, hey, that's a really good idea, but you know what? I don't really understand this part of it, or have you ever thought about exploring this avenue, or this character's kind of stupid, or what would you something like this? You know, that kind of sort of back and forth, and because you know, there's some editors who are really great, and there's some editors who are really bad too, just like anything else. There's some editors who the stuff just comes in, they barely look at it, and it just goes out the door, you know. And again, some of that is the pressure of working at a company when they're doing too many things, but anyway, yes.
Yeah, this guy in the back.
The
guy behind you, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious, as an editor, especially during the days of DC Comics, you said you weren't interested in the superheroes, but did you, I never worked in the comic book field, but did you have to learn some form of history of the past? Like collectors are known as, we talk about history like the Golden Age, the beginning of DC Comics, to the Silver Age period where they were changing and so forth, the Bronze Age.
Well,
Did you have to sort of like try to understand where readers would look at a character? For example, if you talk like Sandman, that was first introduced in New York's World's Fair comic 1939. That's how far Sandman first came back.
Right.
As an editor, did you have to learn some form of history to relate to what they were trying to do?
Oh yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, you know, I self-educated myself on, you know, obviously DC's history over the years, and Marvel's as well too. I mean, you know, I'm not, you know, dismissive of any superhero history. I think it's, you know, it's so much wonderful material has been done and is still so effective. It wasn't material that I personally gravitated towards, but it's huge impact, and you know, and I think it's a universal thing. So, but yeah, I did my homework for sure.
It just makes it a lot easier.
Oh, well, it does, yeah. I mean, just in terms of you know, I mean, I love history. I love to know where things come from, who are the major players in the room. But I also feel that it's and I think trying to be objective about my contribution to comics is because I was an outsider to the medium and I hadn't spent you know, many years just totally, you know, just being a comic book fan. I was able to kind of look at the medium with a different perspective and objectivity, and hoping that kind of different point of view encouraged other writers and artists to kind of look at comics, you know, as this beautiful, unique form of storytelling and do something different with it as well. So, yeah.
What are some of your favorite books right now? What are you reading?
Comics?
Anything.
Anything. Okay, well, I just read a great novel by Jennifer Egan called Manhattan Beach. She's one of my favorite authors. And I really like saga. I don't read a ton of comics, I will say. I don't read a ton of comics. I like Monsters by Marjorie Liu. I like Ms. Marvel by Willow Wilson, because I love Willow's work. I just read another novel called Eileen by this woman writer, Otessa Moshfegh, unusual name, brilliant, dark, twisted stuff. So that's kind of currently on my just read list.
Okay, so we're coming to the home stretch here. Just a question. So, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just a quick question. You said your background was in art history. What artists or art movements are you really a big fan of?
You know, modern art, but modern art went, I guess, from these sort of technical art history years of like the Impressionists. So I guess modern art was technically late 1800s to 1950s, not necessarily the ultra modern art, but more of the kind of Impressionist and sort of futurist movements.
How much did you have to say about the aesthetics, like the look of the comics when you were editing the line? Did you match up the artists and the writers? Did the writers have people they wanted to work with?
Combination of the two. You know, and you know, sometimes, yeah, I would suggest someone, or sometimes a writer would, or yeah,
You also
or sometimes people would come in together with a pitch.
You also stuck to a very straightforward coloring palette at the time when comics were going kind of nuts with Photoshop and stuff like that. I remember the Vertigo books always looked like clean. Was that...
Well, we sort of had a muted look to it. We didn't have, yeah, definitely was not in the airbrushy look was a no-no in my book, yeah, for the kind of stuff that I was doing, yeah, and continue to do. So
I think we have time for one or two more questions. If anybody has any final concluding thoughts, yes, sir.
Yeah, it's great that when you first started out, did you already consciously try to set an editorial style? I just, you know, I never pay attention to editors, but you know, you read House of Mystery, and I just pay attention to the end, is the last issue. Remember, you were in it,
yeah,
closing the house,
that was great.
giving Kane more, you know, sending him to another job. And then so looking back, you know, towards the end, I saw, oh, Karen Berger, she's the one that canceled this.
I didn't write that. Dan Mishkin wrote that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But when I was looking at that, I noticed that there was more like the I, Vampire, there's like continuing characters and such, and it was kind of more of an anthology. So I was just wondering, like, if you already had, you were trying to set a style, and then also I appreciate like later on, I noticed that Kane was in Sandman, and the Karen looked out for him. And
Total coincidence, yeah, But I think Neil had an affinity for Kane too. So no, with me, so much of my sort of editorial viewpoint was I just want to edit stuff that I'd like to read myself. It sounds kind of selfish, but I just I like weird stuff. I like stuff that provokes my way of thinking. I like exploring the world, dark corners of the world. Or I love love reading stories about different cultures and different people and different worlds. And I don't kind of like the same old stuff. So that was sort of that kind of is what kind of generates my point of view.
I know you've done a couple of panels previous to this at this show, and we've got one coming up right after this in the same room.
We do.
Called What's Wrong with Comics.
Please stop now.
Yes. So I was just about to roll into that one. But do you have any other programs, or where else can people find you at this convention for the next couple of days?
Well, I'm leaving tomorrow, so the next panel, and that's about it. But I was here yesterday, too. And I was on two of the panels, and some other people were here at those panels. So.
Okay, so we have another panel coming up following this one with Karen and some other great industry folks. So
What's Wrong About Comics?
What's Wrong with Comics? Yeah, something like that. Anyway, we'll have that discussion. And then tomorrow, if you're further interested in the business side, I will be talking with Dave Scroggie, most recently ex-Dark Horse, but somebody with a long and eventful history in the business. That's at noon tomorrow in the Crescent Room. Yes.
Hey.
Anyway, so please give Karen.
Thank you.